Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel, and I welcome viewers joining us online. Please can I ask members and officers to ensure that mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off for the duration of the meeting. Any member of the public who is due to speak, you'll be introduced by name and invited to address the committee at the appropriate time. I would like to remind members of the procedure for tonight's agenda. Should members wish to amend, remove or add additional recommendations or requests as part of our debates, then they need to state and propose their recommendation at the appropriate time and seek a seconder to then confirm the recommendation. Members will then debate and vote on the additional or amended recommendation as necessary. I ask all members to be mindful of this when preparing questions and comments to ensure that each item receives appropriate attention and scrutiny within the available time. Should it appear that the meeting will run past the constitutional meeting guillotine time of 9 o'clock, then I will ask members to vote on whether to extend the meeting to finish the business on the agenda by a new time. We'll now move to the first item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Callum, have we got any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Howe, Councillor Howes, Councillor Eglin and Councillor Lavelle-Moore, with Councillor Monday acting as substitute.
That's great, thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of September 2025. In relation to the minutes of the last meeting, at last night's meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board, a recommendation to implement a task and finish group as recommended by this committee was approved. The terms of reference and membership of the task and finish group will now be finalised and considered by the committee at a future date. Are members happy for me to sign off the minutes from the last meeting? Bear in mind only those that were present are able to do so. I will seek a proposer and a seconder if everyone's happy. So we've got Councillor Gibbs proposing, Councillor Baker seconding. That's great. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations to make in respect of items on tonight's agenda? No one? That's good, thank you. Moving on. Agenda item 4 then. This is the draft housing fire policy. The purpose of this report is to seek pre-decision scrutiny from this committee on the draft housing fire safety policy before proceeding to request approval from the executive to adopt and implement the policy. I'd like to invite Lynn Buckingham to address the committee. Please remember, Lynn, you have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chair, members and officers. This draft fire safety policy shows the Council is talking the talk, but I'm worried it won't walk the walk when residents' lives are on the line. First, the policy leans heavily on the stay put advice for general needs and sheltered blocks, yet admits residents aren't legally obliged to comply. That contradiction risks confusion in an emergency. Grenfell taught us that mixed messages can be fatal. Residents deserve clarity, not caveats. Second, the fire risk assessments are set to be annual. That's not good enough. Fire safety is dynamic. Things change, risk escalates. Saying defects will be fixed in reasonable timescales is dangerously vague. A high-risk door or an alarm fault should mean days, not months. And we have a situation in one of our blocks where we've been waiting 6 months for a light to be fixed. And in a fire situation, those things are important. Third, the so-called sterile communal area policy looks like it could punish the most vulnerable. No prams or scooters, no mobility aids. Yet the only alternative storage is if residents pay for them. That is neither fair nor compliant with our Equality Act duties. Fire safety must never become a postcode lottery for disabled or low-income tenants. And our tenancy agreement says that you can have permission for a stored mobility scooter. So how will that pan out in the future? Will you have to change the tenancy agreement? Will you have to go out to consultation on the changes? And the government guidance around this area means that you need to take into consideration both fire safety and disabled needs. If this council is serious about fire safety, we need clear, enforceable evacuation strategies, guaranteed timescales for fixing high-risk defects, real equality adjustments for residents with mobility needs, and accountability that cannot be dodged when the alarm sounds. Fire safety cannot be a paper exercise. Residents deserve better. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lynn. Hopefully some of these questions and points you've raised can be answered by the team in a few minutes. So I'd now like to invite Daniel Hannam, who is Head of Housing Maintenance and Development, to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Just to draw your attention to some of the key messages that we are proposing in the fire safety policy. We own and manage over 8,000 homes, primarily located across Corby and Kettering, and are responsible for complying with a number of statutory health and safety requirements for these properties, of which fire is one such compliance element that we are responsible for. We are proposing this fire policy for a variety of reasons. We are in a position at the moment where we are looking to align the two legacy approaches that the former borough councils covering the Corby and Kettering areas adopted, and we are looking to align it into one consistent NNC approach. We want the policy to be clear on how we will provide suitable and sufficient fire safety precautions, how we will conduct risk assessments to the properties, and also how colleagues will manage the arrangements that are put in place with regards to belongings and items that tenants may or may not choose to store. We've worked closely with the Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service when developing this policy, and have taken account of the relevant national legislation as well when we're doing so. We've already consulted with our Tenants Advisory Panel with regards to the policy, and have received support with the proposed policy from the Tenants Advisory Panel. The one recommendation that the panel had was that there would be a 3-month grace period before the policy becomes enforceable, to allow council officers the opportunity to communicate with tenants in our blocks what the new policy will mean for them on a day-to-day matter. At present, like I said, we are working with the legacy policies, and that means that we have two different approaches. In Kettering area, we currently have a sterile policy in place where residents have for a number of years understood that we need to keep the communal areas of our blocks clear from items. In Corby, there is a managed approach. The reason we want to get to one approach is to make it a lot simpler for officers to be able to manage when there are belongings in a stairwell, for example. It's clear for everyone that those belongings don't belong there, and therefore we can ask people to remove them. If there's a managed approach, then obviously we are starting to get into the world of interpretation of what belongings can and can't be stored in those areas. Regards to the fire risk assessment, so the fire risk assessment is something that we will, like I said, be completing annually. But I think just to answer the point that was raised, the fire risk assessment is just one part of it. Colleagues from our tenancy services team will be out completing more regular block inspections to again keep an eye out for any belongings and things. And obviously we will make sure that tenants are aware that they can report any issues to us. So the annual fire risk assessment is completed by an officer that's trained to do that, and it's designed to effectively be a full check of the block for that purpose. So it's not a case of we would only be looking to sort of react annually to anything. That's the sort of planned approach to making sure that we've checked everything that we need to check in the property. I think that sort of probably covers the key points, so I don't know if there's anything else people would like to know before.
Okay, thanks for that. So we'll open this up then to members. Any questions, any comments, any queries or concerns? We'll start with Councillor Monday.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if you covered it. You seem to touch on it a little bit, but what's the enforcement approach if residents obstruct communal areas or breach fire safety requirements? So you spoke a little bit about belongings in communal areas and things like that. So what's the enforcement approach? So if somebody, for example, refuses to move things that are obviously breaching the regulations, safety requirements, what's the enforcement approach on that?
I could probably help you there, Chair. So our proposed approach is engage, educate and enforce. So first of all, it's to speak to the resident to find out why the item is there. Maybe they're on a temporary basis. It may be that they are having difficulties moving items. So it's to see what support we can actually provide there. To make sure we educate them so that they understand what the risk of a fire is. The reason we've gone for a sterile approach is that in the event of a fire, items in communal areas can impede people coming in, the fire service to support you, but also for people to evacuate. They would receive a written warning if that was a continual breach, and in the most serious cases we would serve a notice. So we would hope we could avoid serving a notice, but where a resident continually puts somebody at risk and there's not support or other education around that we can help to avoid that, then we would consider serving a notice.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Lynn, for attending as a public speaker, and your comments are really interesting and insightful, and I'll come back to those in a second. And also thank you, Daniel, for your very thorough and detailed explanation of the policy. I am a little bit concerned in relation to some of the points that Lynn has mentioned, and they were points that I picked up as well in relation to some mixed messaging in the policy, specifically in relation to the stay put or evacuation element of it, and I'll come back to that in a second. I'm really concerned to hear Lynn's point about having to wait for 6 months for a light to be fixed. I don't want to get into the details of specific cases, but that is concerning to hear if that is the case. And I absolutely agree with Lynn that there is a need for clear, enforceable evacuation strategies, and it's on that I want to pick up on. Specifically in relation to 7.9 of the policy in respect of mobility scooters, e-bikes and e-scooters. Presumably that has specifically been mentioned in the draft policy because of a concern in relation to lithium-ion battery fires, which are used in mobility scooters, e-bikes and e-scooters, and fires in respect of lithium-ion batteries present unique and specific risks. And I'm just wondering, because that is the case, whether there does need to be something more specific in relation to lithium-ion battery fires in the policy that we don't see. Now, it may be that you're thinking that that would be covered in the fire risk assessments, but because they do present such a unique nature, I'm just wondering if there's a need for something more specific in the policy. Particularly, of course, because lithium-ion battery fires cannot be extinguished by conventional water sources. But also, my understanding is in relation to the stay put or evacuation element of the policy, if there is a lithium-ion battery fire, residents should on no account be looking to put that fire out themselves, because of the unique nature of the risk that's posed by lithium-ion battery fires. And so I'm just wondering if there's a mixed messaging there in relation to the stay put or evacuation policy, because my understanding, and I'm not an expert, is that if there is such a fire, they should always evacuate, because they should not be seeking to put that fire out themselves. So I'm just wondering if that's something you've given consideration to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The National Fire Chief's position on the stay put, and I quote from their data, has always remained the same. So their position is if your property is affected by fire and your escape route is clear, get out, stay out, and call 999. So that's always been their position. They also don't recommend that you attempt to combat or deal with the fire. That's their area of expertise. It then says that if the fire is inside your property, but your escape route is not clear, it may be safer to stay in your property until the fire service arrives. So it's always been clear, if you can safely evacuate and do so, please do so. If you are blocked, it may be safer for you to stay in your property, and it's an individual choice. It's advice and recommendation, and that's what the Fire Brigade have always provided for us. It says that the advice to stay put unless your fire is directly affected by fire is based on the fire protection provided within the building, so the walls and the cavity and the doors. So I don't think it is as mixed, but we could provide some more clarification on what the Fire Brigade and the Chiefs are saying to us. In terms of the mobility scooters, the Fire Chiefs as well advise that the lithium battery, they try to contain a fire, which is why they don't recommend that mobility scooters are in communal areas. So what they will say is that if a battery catches fire and it's within a flat, it will be contained within that flat, and if you can safely exit, then you should continue to do so as well. At no time are they suggesting that anybody attempts to put out fires, because you will not know what type of fire that is, whether it's gas, whether it's lithium. So their advice is evacuate if it's safe to do so. If you cannot or you are blocked, you should stay in. What's really important for us is that we keep the communal areas clear, that if individuals make a choice that they wish to evacuate and wish to evacuate safely, that we have maintained and kept those areas clear to enable a safe exit.
It's just a quick follow-up, and thank you for that response. I'm just wondering whether in the context of lithium-ion batteries, whether the fire service was specifically asked as part of the consultation to consider the unique nature of that for the purposes of these policies.
We took the advice in terms of their storage of the mobility scooters in the communal areas in terms of those batteries. We haven't asked for additional advice in terms of lithium batteries. Their advice here in terms of us has remained in terms of the mobility scooters of ensuring they're not within the communal areas.
Sorry, Chair, just to come back, just one final point, which your microphone's just on as well.
Sorry, we are also looking at a mobility storage policy which will support those residents who do have mobility scooters, who are unable to perhaps get them into their flats. So we are doing some work with some of our shelter schemes, and we're now starting to do an audit of our residents within general needs housing.
So just to come in on that as well then, so in terms of what Lynn was saying there, is the policy, if this goes ahead, going to breach current tenancy policies, or is it going to
Absolutely
align
not.
with?
I believe that in the current tenancy agreement it does say you shouldn't be storing items in the communal area, and it includes mobility scooters. So there would be no change in the tenancy agreement to do this. What we're looking to do is support those who would need a mobility scooter to find more safer storage for them. And if residents do have, the fire chiefs have said, if you are in a flat and you can store it overnight in the hall, in your hallway, in your kitchen, in your living room, they're actually fine with that, because the event of a fire would be contained within one property rather than the communal block. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Florich.
Thank you. Sorry to butt in. Also, apologies for being a couple of minutes late. I finished work at 6 p.m. I couldn't get here any sooner. So in terms of actually, one of the biggest things that I wanted to mention was around mobility scooters, and I'd like to thank Lynn for popping in as well to deliver those really important points. Specifically, one example I wanted to give was door holders and magnetic or hook or otherwise. There have been residents that have been struggling to get those fixed, and then they aren't able to open doors for themselves, whether that be mobility scooter or for wheelchairs. So I think that needs to be something that's a bit of a priority to make sure that we've got those facilities in place, and possibly a clearer way to report safety issues and things like that needs fixing. I think there's been a clear bit of concern around that possibly the one of the biggest risks is that we're not there are safety defects, things that need fixing, that should be fixed, that we're not necessarily getting around to quick enough. And I think that sounds like possibly one of the biggest risks here. And it'd be nice to know what things we could put in place to deal with those. I can see you want to come back, Yvonne, so I'll pause my other points.
Thank you. I think what's really important to advise is that the legacy councils had a sterile and a managed policy. So we have had one of the sterile policy in one area. What we're looking at to make sure that safety carries across all of our council-owned properties. So we haven't had an increase in risk in fire because we've had a sterile managed policy, and we're looking to maintain that and bring that across to the services. When we do the fire risk assessments, and Dan will be better placed on you to do that, to answer that, we will look at a whole list of components. If there are outstanding repairs, then obviously I will look into those and understand what were the particular issues that related to those individual cases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to carry on a little bit with the point that I was making, because one of the things that I'm concerned about is that when we've obviously got some outstanding fixes that need looking at, but I'm also concerned that those with disabilities might not or might need extra support reporting those. For instance, a telephone line might be more accessible than an online form. Possibly as well, could this information, how this reporting can be done, could that be included also as notices in every property? I hadn't got to the sterile environments, so you kind of jumped in for on that point there. But 7.1.8, sterile environments, I do get this, and I think from a council perspective, it's a much cleaner approach, and obviously the priority being there is safety. From a council perspective and from talking to residents, I think one of the things that this kind of blocks a little bit is just making areas feel nice. Just to sort of maybe find some sort of compromise in there, though, repainting walls, possibly decorating in some sort of way like that, that's not going to cause any sort of fire risk. But I mean, essentially, if they were to request a repaint for that area and potentially work with the council to do so, that could be a way that's a bit of a sort of happy medium there, to make sure that it's safe, but also that we're creating vibrant communities, that we're actually people enjoy living. These are people's homes, and I think our policies need to reflect that as well. I wanted to find out what some of the feedback was from some of the areas where they have had a previous managed approach, and how we're sort of going to manage expectations there and work with them, and if this could be a potential way to meet people where they currently are. And I also wanted to find out more generally what feedback or concerns were raised from the tenant advisory panel. And my final question was just about the communications that we plan to put out, whether is that going to be just a letter? Is that going to be educational material? I think that would be really useful to know. Thank you.
Okay, going to come to David for a response, please.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for your questions, and Councillor Federovich and Councillor Baker. Just with regards to the advice from the fire officer, just to say, whilst we haven't had a formal consultation in the early development of the policy, one of the fire officers did come to our executive to an informal briefing to talk about their preferred approach, their advice that they would give to us as well. Dan attended that for us to accompany them as well. With regards to more vulnerable residents, we would expect to see individual risk assessments around particular approaches that they would need to be supported. So, for example, if they have difficulty opening a door, we would expect to see specific advice within their own individual risk assessments to help them manage with that. I think the communication will depend as well on the different venues. So, for example, within our supported accommodation, we have on-site staff who will have residence meetings with those staff. So it will very much be a conversation around why we're doing things, what we do in that space. And we already have built into our capital programme refurbishment works within our supported accommodation. It used to be called the Sparkle Project. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, David. So we have a programme with our sheltered housing blocks of doing the sort of what we call communal upgrades, so decoration and other resident-led sort of improvements to the communal areas. And one of the things we've also talked about is how we can expand that into some of the general needs blocks. Obviously, it's a different setup with a general needs block, very much usually just a case of a sort of stairwell and a hallway, whereas our shelter schemes have got lounges and communal kitchens and things like that. But yeah, we take the point with regards to if we're asking people not to put any belongings in those areas, we want to try and make them as sort of welcoming as we can. But obviously within the realms of, sort of flooring and paint as opposed to any sort of soft furnishings or alike.
Okay, if we come to Councillor Stone.
Just a quick one from me. What is the response time for safety critical issues with fire safety? I know you say about keeping areas sterile, but you'll always have somebody who wants to put a plant pot, which we know isn't combustible, but people will try and do these things to make it look more welcoming. But if there is a door that doesn't quite close properly, it doesn't, it self-close and needs adjusting, what is the council's lead time on it being reported to actually closing it out?
It very much would vary depending on what the item is. Obviously, the block inspections have on. The frequency of those would pick up on items such as plant pots in there. So from a fire service point of view, they want to see that we've got those regular inspections in place, and obviously you would take the learning from previous inspections as to whether or not those sort of inspections need to be happening more frequently, or if it's a block where there's obviously no risks identified, you're probably going to have a lesser frequency. It would depend very much on what you find on the previous one. With regards to repairs, all of our emergency repairs would be classed as like a 24-hour one, but again, we'd need to see what that repair is. But very much, the sort of types of repairs that we have a 24/7 repair service to do that. Some of the things like the door entry systems that were talked about, we don't actually fix those ourselves. We don't have the in-house skills for that, so we do rely on a contractor to be able to do that. But again, there has been investment in our communal doors, putting more secure by design type doors in place that make it harder for people to gain access into our blocks to again try and keep those blocks as secure as possible to the residents that live there.
Anyone else have any comments or anything they want to raise? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question on consultation in 7.5 on page 17 of the papers, and where it indicates that the fire safety policy won't be enforced until 3 months after the date of approval to allow time to communicate the adoption of new policy to tenants. And I'm just wondering what the situation is if tenants, for some exceptional reason, are not able to comply within those 3 months. So what is the feedback mechanism that's in place to allow tenants to indicate that they can't comply within those 3 months, and that would allow the landlords, NNC, to assist the tenants to assure that they can comply?
So we would be, as I said, talking to the individual tenant to find out what that individual need is. So for some people, it may be they may not have individual storage, it may be that there's a mobility issue. So we would be working with them, family, adult social care, and a referral. We're also doing a programme of tenancy audits to understand what support that we would be able to provide residents with additional support. So as we said before to Councillor Monday, it would be that engage, educate, and only enforcement at the last opportunity. If there are exceptional circumstances where we needed to extend that, we would, but also we have to balance that with keeping everybody else within the block safe as well. So we are actually doing those things already, so that's not anything that will become new just because of this current policy. We just found that it would be reasonable and fair to give people an additional 3 months notice to be able to do that and make adjustments or changes that would be able to support them and ourselves in keeping people safe. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always helpful when there's multiple of us because we all remember different things at different times. The other thing which I know Yvonne would mention would be your recent restructure, Yvonne, where within our tenancy support arrangements, we have increased the number of tenancy officers that will support a smaller patch. So that means that they'll be able to meet with tenants more frequently, be more accessible to them as well, effectively halving their caseloads. So that's another step which the authority and Yvonne's leadership has taken to try and enable greater engagement with our tenants.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the response. I understand the 3 months to be a little bit flexible if the need arises, which is positive to hear. I just had a point or question to go back on what I was saying earlier in relation to mobility scooters, e-bikes and e-scooters and lithium-ion batteries. And you've mentioned that the fire service have been presented with the policy and they had no questions in that regard. And I think you mentioned as well they gave a presentation. Did that apply also in relation to the Council's Tenants Advisory Panel? And can I ask, is that panel supposed to be representative of the residents? Because if it is, then was this put to them as well in relation to the consultation that you had with them? Because I'm really interested in what the residents' position is on this alongside the fire service.
I can take that. So all of our policies do go through the Tenant Advisory Panel. So they go through for consultation and advice. We don't progress any policies unless they have gone through the Tenant Panel. The panel is as representative as it can be, but we have actually undertaken in the last year some activity to broaden our representation on those boards. And one of the things that we are doing is looking at running meetings at different times so that some are more flexible, more venues, using more Teams meetings, different locations to broaden the availability of people coming to engage with us. We have also recently commissioned TPAS, which is the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, which is the National Tenant Engagement Organisation across the housing sector. They have just come and reviewed our tenant engagement options, and they have now provided us with our draft tenant engagement strategy. When we did the TSM, the Tenant Satisfaction Measure Survey last year, 600 people contacted us to advise that they would be interested in engaging with us in some way. And the team have been writing out to all of those 600 to get a better understanding of what they would like to engage and the different panels. So we have a reading panel, a communications panel, and various other panels. And we also will, in the mid-year review report that's coming, actually be writing again to residents to offer them different opportunities to engage. So the Tenant Advisory Panel have been with us since 2021. They have helped us write strategies and bring through some really important documents. And they themselves understand that we do need to broaden our representation. They do understand that when they communicate with us, they're not talking about their own front door. They very much understand the challenge of making sure that they are representing all of our tenants as best as they possibly can. Thank you.
Just to add as well, with regards to the tenant advisory panel, they actually asked if they could go out with the officer that completes the fire risk assessments, and they're actually going to be visiting some of our blocks with him. I think it's next month, Phil. This month, yeah. So they were keen to come out and see the types of things that were looked at and picked up. So the tenant advisory panel did want to be very much involved with regards to that.
Sorry, and just in addition to David mentioning the additional tenancy support team that we have, under the housing restructure, we have configured the structure so that we will have 5 additional caretaking estate officers. So they will actually, in addition to the patch reduction, patches are reduced from around 900 to around 450. We will have 5 additional officers who will be going out and will be able to support, engage with our residents, and also more quickly deal with any of the items that we understand and know that are fire risk, and we'll be able to supporting our residents to do that. Thank you.
Okay, that looks like it's come to about a conclusion there. So just to remind members, as we round this up, the recommendation, the officer's recommendation, and if you haven't already done so during the debate, have you got any amendments that you wish to make to the officer's recommendation, or anything else you want to add to the recommendation? David?
Just picking up on the point around the language in the section about the stay put, I think there was a clear view that we could strengthen the language in there. So I think it's fair for us to propose to include some of the National Fire Chief's language around, just to clarify that position around, actually, whilst we have a stay put approach, if there's a fire in your flat and it's safe to do so, that we would expect you to leave unless it's safer to stay in that environment because your exit is restricted.
Okay, perfect. Just as you're talking about language there, it was one for myself. The notifications that go out to residents, are you going to be using multi-language within the policy and within documentation, posters in the areas to make it clear and easy to understand for all residents?
Most of the documentation we would send out in English. We will have data that will tell us the first mother tongue of individual households, and we do have a translation service as well that we're able to use. Just in terms of the comms as well, that would be a letter, but it will also go in the newsletter, and we have recently started to do a number of animations on our website, which I think was one of the things Councillor Fedovich was very, very interested in us communicating in a different way. So we will be doing an animation around fire safety that would also support. Also, where we have residents who hard of hearing, visual impairment, then we have been working with the individual occupational therapists and family members to make sure that we are supporting them, to make sure that they are able to understand and can comply and be as safe as possible.
So if anyone have anything they want to add in terms of the policy, in terms of recommendations? We're all good? Okay. On that basis then, the officer recommendation is to obviously consider and scrutinise the draft housing fire safety policy at Appendix A and other supporting papers, and provide written feedback of the key points of consideration and any recommendations that scrutiny members would wish for the executive to take into account when receiving this report at its meeting, anticipated to be on the 11th of November. The officer recommendations are to consider the contents, and should, obviously, we've got no further recommendations to add to this, have we? Okay, in that case, I'd look for a proposal.
Sorry, Chair. Actually, just off the back of conversations that we've been having, would it be worthwhile putting some sort of recommendation or note in there about if there are fixes that are required that have, essentially, if we could escalate them faster if they have some sort of safety risk or something related to fire safety? I think that might be helpful, especially for, there's a genuine risk there, and I think that's just a bit of a concern. So.
Okay, if I come back to the officers, I think you said, did you about 24-hour response didn't you, for safety critical issues?
That's fine.
Yeah, for emergency repairs, our response time is 24 hours on emergency repairs. Obviously, it would depend on what the item is that's been brought up as an issue, as to whether it would be something we class as a 24-hour repair or not. But we can certainly, again, take away the comments around how we could look to prioritise any works that are reported.
Okay, and when an issue is raised by a resident, do you feed back to that resident to let them know that it's been identified as a 24-hour repair or further afield? Because obviously a point that was raised by Lynn earlier about a light being out for 6 months, again, I would indicate that as being quite urgent, because if a fire does come, a light being out, if it's smoky, could make a massive difference.
So when the repairs are reported, the way that the system works is it categorises it as to whether it's a 24-hour repair or a longer repair. So when someone phones up, they would be told, obviously, most of the repairs we do are likely to be in a tenant's home, rather than, say, in this case, we're talking about communal area repairs. So if they're in a tenant's home, obviously the tenant needs to be in to let us in, so they're going to know exactly what's going on with regards to when we're going to arrive, and they're going to know that the work's been completed because it's in their home. I think with regards to communal areas, again, it's going to be a case of if, are we able to let the person that's reported it know? Is it reported by a tenant? Is it reported by a member of staff if they're out on estate inspections? So I guess it would depend on where the report came as to whether we're able to confirm that the work's been done on that one.
Okay, on that basis then I'd seek a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations from the officers. Okay, we've got Councillor Gibbs for propose and Councillor Davis for seconding it. So if we can open the vote up and all in favour, show of hands please. So that's unanimous. Thank you. On that basis, we'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the cemetery regulations. The purpose of this report is to seek the comment of the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee on proposal on the application of a single set of cemetery regulations to the 13 working cemeteries owned and managed by Northamptonshire Council. I'd like to invite Ian Smith to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Sam Diamond to my left as the report author to summarise the key aspects of the report this evening, and just to introduce to her right Jane Blanchard, who's the Bereavement Services Manager, who will be here tonight to support any technical questions members have. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. This is a request to look at the draft Northamptonshire cemetery regulations. This is the last phase of harmonising the Bereavement Services offer to Northamptonshire residents. Across the 13 cemeteries, it does not include what was the East Northants district, because they are managed by town and council, so we're talking specifically about the Corbin, Kettering and Wellingborough cemeteries, of which there are 13. So we have harmonised, we're looking to harmonise the offer across the size of memorials across all the different cemeteries. There are different areas in different cemeteries. Not all cemeteries have all options. There's a mix of traditional lawn cemetery, there's children's areas, there's an oversized area, and there's some different sort of more naturalised areas in different cemeteries. So this is looking to standardise the memorial sizes, for example, across lawn cemetery memorials and traditional cemetery memorials, which are a headstone with a curb set rather than just a headstone as you find in a lawn cemetery. So, and then standardising the offer of a slightly larger memorial in our oversized area. We're also seeking to bring in the single depth grave policy that we have currently across Corby's Shire Lodge extension. This is where the ground conditions don't allow us to bury double depth for families. So for those where the ground conditions are, they hold a lot of water, and it makes it unsafe for the digging, the burial and the backfilling of the grave. So we're looking to standardise that in all cemeteries where those ground conditions are prevalent. As an option to families, we offer a side-by-side solution instead of a double-depth solution. And we're also looking to align the hours of Wellingborough cemeteries in line with Corby and Kettering, which were amended last year. So that's the outline of the proposals we're seeking to bring in. So we're trying to clarify to members of the public the cemeteries are managed appropriately and consistently, and everybody, whichever cemetery their loved one is buried in, has the same standard of service. We're trying to balance public safety against the security of the sites and prevention of any potential antisocial behaviour. So it's very simplistic.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll open it up to members if any questions or concerns or comments. Yeah, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Samantha, for the introduction. And as you say, it does seem very simplistic, at least it does to my eyes and ears anyway, so thank you for that. I just had one question, and it's in relation to streamlining the opening hours of Wellingborough Cemetery. And again, the streamlining there seems very simplistic. I think it's only by half an hour every 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm just wondering if there's been a financial impact assessment that's been undertaken in relation to whether there's any cost benefit to bringing those hours in line with the other cemeteries. I'm just wondering in that regard whether the council is actually saving any monies by changing those times at Wellingborough Cemetery, that's all.
No, they're currently locked. There's no change to the cost at all. They're currently opened and secured by a third-party company for us. So there's no change to the cost. It's just aligning it. The biggest difference in Wellingborough is that on public bank holidays, the cemeteries are open an hour less than the regular time. They have a winter-summer opening, the same as the rest of the cemeteries, but historically, public bank holidays, they've opened later and shut earlier, and we just want to offer Wellingborough residents the same as across the rest of the cemeteries.
Okay, my only concerns that there was negative feedback from quite a few Corby residents when the opening hours were changed. Have you taking this into consideration with regards to what now passing on Corby, Kettering over to Wellingborough, how the residents are going to respond to that? And is the primary reason for want of a better term, for preventing access to the cemeteries, blocking access to the cemeteries overnight down to antisocial behaviour? And as a result of that, is that the best way to deal with antisocial behaviour in these areas, stopping people being able to visit their loved ones whenever they would maybe want to?
So we went out to consultation. So there was a 5-week consultation on these draft regulations, and the opening hours featured as a key question. There has been some feedback that 4:30. People object to the 4:30 closing in winter. However, we've had other feedback that says they agree with those hours. So there's mixed feedback. So we have gone out to consultation. We haven't finished going through all of the consultation individual comments as yet. We're doing that in preparation for the executive meeting, and we'll also take into account any feedback from tonight's meeting from the Scrutiny Committee. The antisocial behaviour aspect is historic, and it's featured across three main cemeteries of Doddington Road, Shire Lodge and Warren Hill. We've had a mix of antisocial behaviour, drug taking, people just making a lot of noise and families being concerned about their memorials, and also we've had rough sleepers, so we've engaged with the outreach team for that in the past, haven't we? So it is difficult to balance securing the sites with people's ability to visit their loved ones, but we do open the cemeteries 365 days a year. You know, people do work long shifts, but they have days off, not necessarily in the week. We're trying to accommodate what's best for the majority of the community.
Okay, thanks for that.
And Chair, if I just may add to that, so basically in terms of just publicising the changes, it will be linked to a significant comms campaign in terms of making people aware of the changes, particularly in the Wellingborough area, if those changes are approved. You did say about potentially looking at other ways of potentially combating ASB. I guess as Sam said, it's about trying to strike the balance between access and sort of safety issues and trying to ensure there's not an increase in some of these issues that we've had to manage around antisocial behaviour. And we do have to be sensitive about use of CCTV and issues like that in these areas. So whilst there is CCTV that manages and monitors access and egress points in cemetery, it's not really deemed appropriate or proportionate to have CCTV surveillance directly over areas where people are grieving around graves, etc. So I guess that has to be taken into account as well about sort of when you can potentially monitor and manage, and we can do that during daylight hours essentially because we have people on site and around site, but outside those hours we don't. And on balance, we don't necessarily think it's appropriate for people to be in cemetery grounds after dark because they're not lit. You can't really see effectively. There are sort of multiple hazards and the concern is around sort of increase in terms of some of those sort of antisocial behaviour incidents we've had to deal with. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Just to come back to you, Samantha, in terms of the public consultation, do you have an idea yet, it might not be exact, but figures of how many responses you actually got overall?
Yeah, we had 144 responses. 136 people responded via the Your Voice consultation, and we had 8 people respond separately by email. And we've had a lady anonymously give some more feedback since the closure of the consultation, but we'll include her feedback in that as well because it's pertinent.
Okay, just in terms of that in public consultation, obviously 144, that may be good numbers for public consultations that we've run previously from the council, but it seems low to me looking at it from an outside perspective. We've got almost 370,000 residents across Northamptonshire Council. So I feel obviously not everyone's going to see the consultation, not everyone's going to respond to the consultation, but are you prepared for responses if this goes live, to then getting a lot of feedback from negative feedback like happened with Corby?
Yes, I think so. That we know that the consultation was picked up across local media, both online, print, I suppose, if people picked up a local paper, and via the radio and BBC News. So a lot of people reflected that in their responses in the consultation because we asked how they heard about it. I did go back to the consultation team. 144 responses is quite a high number of responses, but they wouldn't like to give an average because it depends on the nature of the consultation and so forth. So we would always listen to any feedback from a user of the service and take that into account where we can.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Quick question. Obviously there are people who vandal headstones, which is deplorable and should have a custodial sentence in my opinion. However, if you are to secure the cemeteries, are the rough sleepers, those who have got ill will to go in a graveyard, why they wouldn't hang out in the graveyard, I don't know, but will closing them prevent it? Do they have decent walls around them? Is there perimeter fencing that can't be easily accessible?
Yeah, they have perimeter fencing. Yeah. Jane is more familiar, so...
They all have perimeter fencing. Shire Lodge does, London Road, Warren Hill and Doddington Road. So they've all got perimeter fences. I mean, theoretically, I suppose people could climb over them if they want to, but I mean, it's a bit of a dangerous situation if they do. I mean, we haven't had any rough sleepers for a while because the cemeteries are closed. So it seems to be working, but obviously, you know, you can't sort of like say 100% it's never going to happen again.
I'm just sure that some are more secure than others.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, just as an additional safeguard as part of the closing procedures, the cemeteries are checked for people who are still in the cemeteries, etc. at that time. So if there was anybody who was within the cemetery still at the time of closure, they'd be invited to leave, etc. So that hopefully would pick up on anybody who was in the cemetery at the time of closing. But as Jane said, there's obviously only so far we can go in terms of protecting the boundaries, but they are suitably fenced and gated.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Davis for that question. It's something I was thinking of as well, particularly as London Road Cemetery in Wellingborough is in my ward. If somebody wants to rough sleep in a cemetery or partake in drugs overnight in the cemetery, then they're going to do so, no matter the perimeter fencing, quite frankly. And I don't think that's something that we can necessarily try and solve here tonight or in the near future. I just wanted to go back to the question I posed in relation to the cost savings of aligning the opening times, specifically because in 4.3 of the papers on page 43, you do say that aligning the opening hours would seek to obtain better value for money in the procurement of the future contracts. My question was, have you done any financial impact assessment in relation to aligning those opening hours to indicate what the cost savings would be, because you have indicated that that is a key point for aligning those hours? Thank you.
So that relates to the fact that at the moment we have individual contracts work to lock those cemeteries. So they're not delivered by a single contractor. That's where we'd get any value for money return. At the moment, we're paying for individual contracts to individually lock. The council as a whole is looking to, make efficiencies and savings where it can by bringing in contracts that offer better value for money, because we have a single contractor that will work his way around, or however they deliver it. So that's where the value for money comes from. We might get a saving there, but at the moment, changing the opening hours will not change the costs to the service.
Anything for anyone else? In that case, I'll bring this one to a close. The officer recommendation for this is it's recommended that that this committee review the proposed cemetery regulations will apply to all 13 cemeteries owned and managed by NNC as a consultee, and consider any comments I wish to make to the executive prior to making the final decision. We've had no additional comments or amendments to that, so on that basis I'd like to seek a proposer and a seconder for the officer recommendations. Okay, so we've got Councillor Baker to propose and Councillor Monday to second, in which case we'll now open up the vote. All those in favour, please show your hands. So that is unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item 6. So this is the local transport plan development and programme timeline. The purpose of this report is to provide information on the progress to date with the Northamptonshire Local Transport Plan, report on the findings from the recent public consultation for the LTP baseline report, and identify the programme and the timelines for the development of the LTP. Again, I'd like to invite Lynn Buckingham to address the committee, and as per before, Lynn, you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Northamptonshire is still working to a transport plan written back in 2012. 13 years on, it is badly out of date, and now we're told the new plan won't be adopted till 2027. Residents will be left wondering why they are expected to wait 15 years between plans when our transport challenges, from buses to potholes, are staring them in the face today. The consultation so far produced 142 responses. The number hardly feels representative. People will ask how such a small sample can possibly capture the priorities of all our towns and villages. They will want to know how the council intends to reach thousands of people, not just a handful, and especially how it will hear from rural communities, disabled residents and young people who rely most on public transport. The results we do have are clear. Residents want a greater priority for buses, walking, cycling and rail. They don't want more focus on cars and e-scooters. People will want to see those preferences hardwired into the plan, not quietly watered down later. Residents will also be asking, once the plan is adopted, how will delivery be tracked? Will there be milestone budgets and clear reporting back to communities? Or will this be yet another shelf plan that gathers dust while the roads get worse and services decline? People will also want to know why no equality screening has yet been carried out when transport decisions directly affect access to jobs, schools and healthcare. And they will ask how the council will measure and publish its quantifiable carbon reductions. So progress towards carbon neutrality is not hidden away in a technical annex, but visible to all. These aren't my questions, they are the questions residents across North Northants will be asking if this local transport is to command public trust. It must deliver clear answers, real accountability, and above all, a transport system that is affordable, reliable and sustainable for the people who depend on it every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate that. I'd like to invite Surendra, sorry, am I pronouncing that correctly, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take it, and then Chris and Surendra are here. If there's any questions, they've certainly been developing this report and can do any detailed conversations that you might have in response to any questions that you might have. So, firstly, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to discuss this with you this evening. Councillor Buckingham is absolutely right. The current local transport plan for North Northamptonshire is in fact one that was adopted by the former county council some time ago, and it's certainly absolutely right that this authority would want to take forward work to update that local transport plan so that it reflects the needs and the views of the local communities. That's absolutely correct. I totally support that. This is the very early stages of the local transport plan. We had hoped as an authority to be further forward with it by now, but for a number of reasons that are outlined in the report, that hasn't been possible. What I would like to reassure you with is just because we don't have an up-to-date local transport plan or one that's been adopted recently doesn't mean there hasn't been a huge amount of work going on around developing the transport activities and initiatives and options for local residents across North Northamptonshire, and you will know from previous work that's come through the executive recently, and indeed through this committee recently, around the work around buses, for instance, and the focus on enhancing the bus services across North Northamptonshire is just one example, and also reports in relation to active travel and the local and cycling walking improvement plans, which have also come through this chamber as well. So a great deal of work has been going on by the same small team, and that's some of the reason why the local transport plan itself hasn't developed, is because they've been developing those other plans and initiatives to help the residents of North Northamptonshire travel around through their daily roles. The local transport plan will, of course, involve far more consultation as it is developed, and the later stages are probably of greater interest to local residents because they will focus on the policies, the initiatives, the solutions, the schemes, etc., that will come forward over the next few years as the local transport plan is implemented. So there will be further consultation as we develop up the detail of the plan. The plan itself, as you would expect, will seek to reflect the emerging corporate plan that's been out to consultation recently, and of course the Big 50 vision as well. And also the local plan, which is also in development. So all of these initiatives, programs, plans will come together to be a sort of holistic place-shaping framework for Northamptonshire. We have been waiting for government guidance on developing local transport plans. We've been promised by Department for Transport for some time for that guidance, but it hasn't been forthcoming as yet. We're told that it may well come this year, 2025, but rather wait any longer for it. We're proposing to push on. That will, of course, require us to be adaptable, because if that guidance emerges, and obviously we hope it does, we might have to adapt the later stages to reflect that guidance. But rather than wait for it, we're proposing that we proceed. In 2.6, you'll see the further stages that need to come as part of this development, and some high-level timeframes against each of those stages, 6 in total. We've currently completed the first of those stages, so there's a long way to go, but we want to go as quickly as we can, but also bearing in mind the importance of decent consultation and meaningful consultation, and also obviously getting the vision and the policy framework correct. The baseline report has been completed, and the results are in the appendix for you. I have to apologise, because in reviewing the report again ahead of this evening, you will actually notice, if you look closely at the two tables, the figures are actually identical. So there's clearly been an error there in transposing the figures, so I do apologise. My colleague here, Chris Ragg, has them in his notebook. Should you want to hear them this evening, he can tell you sort of which were the most popular, if you like, out of that table 2. Table 1 is correct, table 2 is incorrect, and we can obviously circulate that to the committee as well, Chair, but I do apologise for that. I think that's probably enough from me, and certainly I welcome comments and questions, and I'm sure my colleagues will be happy to help answer those. Thank you.
Thanks for that, thank you. And we'll open up to the floor. Any comments, questions or concerns? Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you very much. Very excited to see this. We definitely need to be talking about transport a lot more. I did mention quite a few in our sort of pre-meeting, but I'll probably try and go back over those a little bit. Just firstly, we've obviously been asked to discuss the sort of the time frame, as well as a couple of other aspects, but I think I'm of the opinion that having a good plan does take time, but that doesn't mean the work stops, like you say. And I really would like this to be, as we always talk about living, breathing documents, all that stuff, but I really think this should be. It should be identifying risks, some quick wins potentially during this work, and doing that, and having that as part of our Big 50 process as well, and shouting about some of those things, which I'm sure we probably would do anyway. There are so many things and areas that we can support on and influence, and I think that we should be doing that as we go. So just going through some of the points. One of the big things that I really think would be vital is how exactly what has been hit on already is how are we going to reach people? How are we going to do that effectively? I've talked a lot about town and parish councils and utilising them better. What I would love to propose is for us to have transport champions within our. We've got them for like our pathway network, but we really need to be constantly talking at every level about this, because otherwise we won't get the level of detail that we need. And like you say, things do adapt and things do change all the time. So what I would really love to see with this and with other consultations and things is for us to do briefings as Northamptonshire Council and invite all of our layers of town and parish councils, so that they feel the urgency and the importance of this piece of work, and go out and help us find those places. One of the things I found that wasn't really coming out very clearly was how we're going to reach some of those usually sort of hard to reach people. So you've got like those with disabilities and the elderly. They are probably some of the ones that have the greatest difficulty with transport, and yet they're also the hardest to reach. So I think having an agreed plan, a bit of some suggestions. I really think potentially having a bit of a pack almost, so like a briefing and a pack for town and parish councils to take away and say, okay, this is these are people who we would reach out to, that we recommend that you do the same, and they might know of people who are not in our sort of registered list. Generally as well, it kind of comes on to the last agenda item today. I think we could be a little bit more proactive with having quite a good list, and our local town and parish councils will know some of these groups and be probably more aware of them than we are. So I think trying to build up our own list so we can more proactively reach out to people would be helpful. Okay, so in terms of, I think obviously it was really useful to look at the different percentages of where people thought we should be spending a lot more time. Buses was really, really clear that we need to do a lot more work. And I think I mentioned this in the scrutiny pre-meeting. I think we need to use this as an opportunity to take a more holistic view and pitch in some potential opportunities that are not maybe things that people don't even know about, like car sharing schemes, community minibuses, obviously like things like DMT and things like that. But we need to be asking the right questions, and I think giving people some prompts, and actually they might not have even thought that they could have some other transport options. So I think it might be a little bit of an education piece as well, but I'm really conscious that we need to have a holistic view of what's working and what's not, because at the moment I think, especially with rural communities, some things definitely aren't working. Making sure that we're sort of like backing sort of early strategies backed by data, looking at how much investment potentially that we're putting into certain areas. I mean, I've had people query me about the Greenway, which is obviously something we massively support, but also the balance of making sure that we're improving existing infrastructure that might be more potentially beneficial to local residents if they're trying to get into work in their local town. And really big thing, I come through this all the way through, is just looking at quick wins. This should be part of our Big 50 work. Reinstating old cycle pathways and things like that. If residents call for some quick wins during this process, I think we should put resource aside to help make that happen as part of this piece of work, because otherwise it just becomes, we get this fantastic detailed responses, and then sometimes I worry that some of those things might not be acted upon. So I don't know if we can dedicate some resource to that. I probably have a couple more things, but I'll come back in a bit. Thank you.
I'll open up for response.
Thank you, Chair. I need to say that's really helpful. Thank you. And that's why we're here. We're keen to hear the views of members, and I totally agree that the consultation framework, if you like, is part of the next stage. And it's really important that we think carefully about how we can reach as many people as we can, especially those people who are obviously may well, as you say, find it more difficult to access our various different options around transport. So I concur entirely, and we'll do our best to do that.
Sorry, just to come back on that, what are our strategies for reaching sort of disabled backgrounds? Or, I mean, we'll have maybe some networks there for existing groups and things. Is that generally how you go through? I mean, things like elderly, I don't know.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Our consultation team advises on that. So we do have those connections. We have those connections through our community's work anyway, because of course we want to work with various different groups. So we have that, and so therefore we have those relationships that we can use to reach out to people. But I entirely agree with you. We can use the networks of our networks. So, we've got a town and parish network there. We will know some of the organisations that they know of, but not all of them, so they can help to cascade the information. So we need to spread it very widely. And as you've mentioned yourself, and the report refers to Big 50, will we use that Big 50 framework and platform to promote this as well? I know that Big 50 partners are very keen for transport to be a strand within Big 50, quite rightly so. It's all about creating a prosperous, connected place. So we will, of course, engage with Big 50 partners. That. And we will look to them to also promote the message and to cascade to their networks.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to Councillor Davis, and then we'll come over to you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Davis.
Just a quick question. Lynn, sat in the corner there. Thank you for coming in this evening. Is that Lynn?
That's Lynn, but it's not a corner.
On the back wall. Lynn's obviously going to go back and say that she came to the council last night and she heard lots of things. Some she might say wasn't the most interesting, maybe waffle, who knows. What can she go back to her friends, colleagues and everyone to say, do you know what? This is what they assured me I can look forward to in the next 3 to 6 months. And how do we keep Lynn in the loop? Can we email her once a month, once a quarter to say, we've done nothing, ever so sorry, or look what we have done. Please let everyone know in your area. There's a question, eh?
So you, Chair, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's an excellent challenge, so I like it. I think the first thing is tonight is about setting out the opportunity for engagement. So the next stage is very clear that is where we set, and I say we because all of us who play a part in this, where we set up what that consultation framework looks like. You will see the later stages, as I mentioned briefly earlier, the later stages are really where we get into the detail of the plan. That's not happened yet because we haven't engaged with people on that yet. So the next stage is around the opportunity that our communities have to engage with us. And I think you're absolutely right around the updates as well. I think that's, again, something we can take away and think about how we're going to communicate that progress. And we can obviously do it through the website, but I'm also mindful that's not the medium that everybody uses to access information, and they need to be prompted to go and find it if it's on our website. So we can think through all of that. And again, our town and parish councils, indeed our own elected members, are conduits for information out to our communities. So we will use you, if you don't mind me saying so, to get messages out to your communities and enable you to pass those messages on, but also to gather that feedback from communities back to us. So I think it's a good challenge for us to go away and think about how we can communicate it as we develop it out.
But the best feedback is word of mouth. So if our constituents can go back to their friends, colleagues, work and just say, I went to a meeting, wow, I'm going to get some reassurances. And I think that goes a long way than listening to us talk council stuff.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Graham, for the introduction, also those responses, and thank you again to Lynn for coming and speaking on this particular item, which is incredibly important. But absolutely, Graham, in relation to what you've just said in respect of feedback and ongoing feedback to residents, that is absolutely one of our responsibilities as councillors, and we should all be doing that as any policy progresses that's of importance to our residents. In that regard, though, you mentioned the involvement of your consultation team. In relation to the development of this plan, I'm just wondering whether there is any possibility that we can have access to the consultees that you go out to in each case. You've mentioned in 7.5.2 that the timetable that you have in place allows for 2 stages of public engagement and a formal consultation period. In relation to who you engage with and who you consult with, are we allowed access to that list of consultees whilst the consultation is ongoing, so that we can then identify whether there's any gaps in relation to any relevant parties within our wards?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about, listed groups and things like that, yes, that's not confidential information. So yes, we can circulate that, and that may well be useful, as I think you're suggesting there. We can provide that actually before we launch a consultation, and we can say, look, this is how we intend to publicise it. These are the groups we intend to go to. Are there any gaps? I don't know if we've started that exercise already, to be honest, but we can certainly do that. So yes, we would welcome that involvement. And our consultation team, they're running consultations on a variety of different things, like you heard earlier in the evening. So they will be developing these lists all the time as well. They won't be static, a bit like you're saying, a living document. Their list will be a living document that they can update as they go along. So yes, welcome that feedback.
Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic, particularly if it can be done in advance and we could have some sort of input into that. If that's possible, I'd really appreciate that. I don't know about the other members of the committee. I just had 2 other questions, and one is to pick up on Councillor Fedorovic's point about this strategy needing to be undertaken in a holistic, or this policy or this plan being developed in a holistic, strategic, coordinated manner. You've mentioned in paragraph 2.3 the other plans and policies that this will be developed in line with, and I'm particularly interested in relation to the development of the local plan that this has to have a direct read across to. And it's not just a question of this plan being developed in line with that. They have to be done hand in hand. They can't be done in isolation, and they can't be done in silos. It's incredibly important. I did just notice, though, that the timetable for the development of the local plan is almost identical to the development of this particular plan. So I'd be interested to know if that's coincidental or if that's on purpose. If it's on purpose, I think that's really positive. If it's coincidental, well then, hey-ho, but it's still roughly the same. I am interested also in relation to the length of time that you will be engaging the public and your formal consultation period. The timetable here in relation to this plan is due to be completed, I think, autumn 2027. Now, if you're going to have 2 stages of public engagement, a formal public consultation period, consider all of the responses back from each of those stages, amend the draft plans in response to each of those consultation stages and the comments that come back from them, and go back out in each case, as you set out in 7.5.2. That's quite tight, actually. It might seem like a long way away, autumn 2027, but actually when you factor that in, and assuming that these consultations aren't tick box exercises, and I'm sure they're not, that's quite tight. So I'd just be interested in your views on that as well.
Yeah, Surendra may well like to come in on that latter point, but I'll make a few comments first. It is tight, you're right. And, you know, I probably share everybody's thoughts, which is autumn 2027 on one hand seems like a long time to wait until we've got a local transport plan. You know, we're all eager to have it first. But taking your point earlier, Councillor Federich, we want a robust plan, we want the right plan, and therefore we don't want to rush it. But you're right, there's an awful lot to do, and we need to make sure that consultation is meaningful. So Surendra might make a few more comments about that. In terms of the alignment with the local plan, I think I'll leave it to say that it's a great opportunity to have them aligned in that way, because it doesn't always happen. It's probably quite rare, actually, that local authorities manage to line up the 2 pieces of work. But we do have a sweet spot over the course of the next 6 months or so where we're developing policies and the framework for both plans at the same time, and we will absolutely do everything we can to get that read across. And I think we can also think about how the consultation reads across as well, so that we're not seeing the consultation on the local plan and the consultation on the local transport plan as sort of isolated responses. There'll be different consultations, because it probably have to be for a number of different reasons, but we can make sure that in the background we're looking for the synergies and the links between the 2, so that it's kind of a holistic framework, as I talked about earlier. So if there's any more you want to say, Surendra, through you, Chair, on the timetable.
Not sure the mic. I think Graham needs to turn the
off. Maybe.
Yes. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Chair. I think all the points that Graham made are very valid. We are actually working with the local plan people and have been for the last few months in development of the LTP. So it's both by design and by luck as well. One thing I would say is that the whole plan is that, and taking this long and maybe longer, is that we actually have a plan that's owned by people. So if you look at the report, we were even looking at how we have a members group throughout, a governance structure that guides, advises, and we can feed back to. And so the whole purpose of this plan, and we're not just going to consultants to develop a plan, is that we actually own that plan. And collectively, if we get the right things in there and it's agreed, then it's more likely to be acted upon and owned by people. Autumn 2027 is the plan. If it does get delayed, we will do everything in our power not to do that by adopting a proper project management approach. And as I've said in the report, if we need specialized research or consultation services to analyze something, then we will make use of that. Thank you.
Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you. So the adoption for this local travel plan is expected to come in autumn 2027. Apologies. What's the typical longevity of the plan after that? So once it's adopted and implemented, how long is it expected to be in existence?
Thanks. The legislation sets no timescale for when a plan should be updated. Typically something like 5 years would be a good a good sort of timescale to do it. But it is one of those things, in the past we've gone, when we really don't want to update it now because we want to wait for the new. I remember doing one just before the new local plans for both West and North Northants were adopted, and we developed the plan and then effectively had to do it again 2 years later to actually align with the very significant growth aspirations that were coming out at that stage. So sometimes, it's both the timeliness of the plan and also, what is going around. So it can be local plans, it can be external developments. Something, although it's not particularly relevant to us in North Northamptonshire, something like HS2 in the county in the past was a huge change not in its immediate impact on our transport network, because it just effectively passes through West Northamptonshire as it is now, but actually in the capacity it would have released, and if the whole of it had been built, there would have been benefits to release capacity on the Midland Main Line through North Northamptonshire. So, there are those externalities that you can't always predict. What other things are going to happen that cause you to need to review the plan?
Thank you, Chris. Typically, how robust would a travel plan be? Because if this is 2 years to write the plan and adopt it, and then potentially be in operation for the next 5 years after that, how would it react to significant new housing developments or infrastructure or economical developments in the area? Would it be robust enough to react and adapt to those things?
Yeah, thanks. The policy framework should be robust enough to adopt to wherever any development is, particularly because the expectation is that a new development will meet its immediate transport needs through either what the developer does or through developer contributions. So we wouldn't, that's there. Where it does change is actually more if you go into the minute detail, and that's part of the challenge in the plan. So it's if you actually get to the stage of putting a detailed list of schemes together and you come up with, I'll give a small example, because the small examples are where you see some of the biggest change. You put in a proposal for a zebra crossing, and then either technically looking at it as zebra crossing is the wrong solution, it should be a pelican crossing, or actually when you look at it, a controlled crossing in that area doesn't work because the residents object to it because it takes too much parking out. Or just, or as we have had before in a situation where you've actually wanting to put it on, the best put it on the crest of a bridge because that's the only safe place to see it, but you can't build it there because there's pipes under the footway that actually prevent you putting the poles in. As daft as that sounds, that can happen. So one of the challenges when doing the plan is to get that right balance between what the plan says strategically about how you should be spending the money, because hopefully we're going to have allocations of funding for the first 3 or 4, for the first few years of the plan that allow us to align quite closely with the amount of money we've got to spend, but giving you enough flexibility to, not having buttoned scheme, exactly what you're doing too tight to be able to respond to consultation and those sort of things.
Can I just come in there? That's absolutely right. The policy framework and the strategic nature of the plan linked with the Big 50 aspirations, the corporate plan and the local plan means that should be very, very robust. And the measures and interventions would go over 5 years, again, practically depending on the money. So on the reverse side, if we had lots of money come in to fund this, then we can sort of ramp that up. So the policy framework is the real important thing that people buy into. The intervention is where people would actually look at it because everybody wants something done in their own areas and so on. But that should be flexible enough depending on what's happening and how much funding we have.
another one from me. What are the budgets for developing and implementing the plan? Additional costs, materials, consultants. Why are we always going to consultants? Don't you have the resource in your team? Would it be cheaper to employ somebody on a fixed contract rather than consultants?
So I don't have the figures to hand. I don't know if Chris has the figures to hand, so I don't want to put him on the spot for the figures. But we've had some funding from the Department for Transport for developing our local transport plan. So we have funding that way. In terms of the use of consultants, we obviously think very carefully about what resources we need to develop the plan. Clearly, as you've been hearing, you tend to develop a plan every 5 years, maybe even slightly longer, as in the case we are in at the moment. So you don't need those resources all the time, clearly, and you wouldn't want to pay for those resources all the time in-house and then not need them for 5 years. So using consultancy is a good way of being able to address the ebb and flow of the resource demands that you have. But also, we wouldn't necessarily need those resources even within 5 years very often, because they're specialist resources that you would bring in for a piece of work, and the consultants that are doing this all over the country. So they've got tried and tested models, they're doing it regularly, they're up to date with the latest best practice guidance, etc. So you're buying into that expertise when you need it. So we would only use consultants when those requirements were in place. We've got a team. We've been recruiting to that team for the last couple of years. I'm pleased to say Chris has now almost got a fully populated team, which is really great, and it's enabling us to do this work now, because if you recall, a few years ago we did have a resourcing constraint which was preventing us from doing this work. Since we've had a much more populated team, we've been able to do all the work on the buses, doing all the work on the local cycling, walking transport plans that I mentioned earlier, and we can do this as well. We do also have fixed term contracts as well within the team, so we're already using a number of different ways to resource the team in order to produce the amount of work that we've got. Part of our responding and being able to be adaptable is also, as Chris was just saying a second ago, the implementation of the plan, the building out of interventions, if you like, is largely dependent on funding from the Department for Transport. And we have just had a large allocation from the Department of Transport for this year, and for future years it's coming as well. So that enables us to deliver a lot more of the next coming years than perhaps we have in the past, which is really, really great as well. So the funding is quite a good picture at the moment, I'll be honest.
Councillor Florich.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to come back on a couple of bits that I didn't get to. Very, very quickly, it was just a case of a couple of things like a digital mapping tool. I wanted to mention, I don't know if we're looking at that, but I know it's been used for the LC whips, and they were really, really good for identifying like some hotspots and things. Also, possibly, I obviously mentioned about sort of the different opportunities, things like car clubs that people aren't maybe aware of. I didn't know if that could be incorporated into other things that we already do, such as, I know, like any sort of conferences or education pieces that we're doing, or encouraging parish councils to maybe run a bit of a showcase, if you like, something like that, maybe a more central one. But I thought sometimes seeing some of these opportunities kind of brings it to life a little bit more. Also, I mentioned about different questions and asking the right question, but I thought I just kind of made literally notes of one thing that's kind of that you like working well, one thing that doesn't. Also some transport improvement that you'd most like to see, so that we could kind of maybe tease out some of those quick wins a little bit. And also possibly in terms of having a systematic approach, I didn't know if it had been considered about having a ward-based approach. So, I mean, obviously every ward will have its own little intricacies and its problems and things, but I don't know if that might be helpful to almost have every ward councillor feedback something specific from, like on a form or something from their particular area, because I think if prompted, individual councillors might really think about it and be able to sort of tease out some of those things. I definitely could for mine, which I would feed into the main consultation. And then the final sort of thing was about transparency, and if we could, obviously I mentioned about communicating any quick wins, possibly just through our normal comms channels, but I didn't know if actually we could be a bit more transparent with it and have really lay out, not necessarily as part of the policy, but as something that these are some quick wins that we've identified, SMART goals for 1 to 5 years, things that we think are genuinely realistic for us, and kind of hold ourselves to account a little bit on it and say, okay, well, we're going to try and commit to those and give like a red amber update or something, just to show to people that we are really listening. And something like that on the website, I think people would really appreciate that. So thank you.
Only to say thank you. You're right. Thank you. Chris and Surrender here are jotting things down. So thank you for those suggestions. We'll certainly take them all away and see how we can feed them in. We have used, as you say, the digital mapping in the past for the LC whips, so it may well be appropriate to use something similar. Again, it works on a place-based approach that works very well.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any other comments or concerns? No. Okay, so the officer recommendation for this one is just to consider and note the contents. So as we've made no further recommendations, there's no vote required on this one. So on that basis, thanks for the officers and members, obviously, for the contributions during the debate. I confirm that the members of the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee have noted and considered the contents of the report and relevant appendices, and have raised comments for feedback as well as any concerns. We should now move forward with the agenda. We've been about 90 minutes, an hour and a half here, so I'm just going to offer a 5-minute comfort break for anyone if they want it at this stage, and then we'll come back to the final item on the agenda for tonight. So if we pause for 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, if we can look at getting started again, please. So I was going to start. We're just going to wait for the public speaker, obviously, with the access. So we'll just wait a few more minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll continue now then with the last item for tonight, agenda item 7, the statement of community involvement. The purpose of this report is to propose a revised Northamptonshire Statement of Community Involvement, SCI, to be reported to Executive for adoption. Again, we have a public speaker, Lynn Buckingham. So again, I'd like to invite you to address the committee. And again, you've got 3 minutes, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you'll be pleased to know this is my last one this evening. So, Chair, members, officers, the Statement of Community Involvement sets out how North Northamptonshire Council will consult. But this is the crucial question. How do we hold developers to account when they consult badly, or when they promise facilities during consultation and then fail to deliver? If this SCI is to build trust, it must go further. I propose 5 areas of where you need to be looking. Developer-led consultation, page 11 onwards. Add a requirement for the public register of consultation commitments. Every promise or facility offered by the developer during consultation must be logged, published online with the application, and referenced in the committee report. If those commitments are dropped, that should weigh against the developer. Publicising planning applications. Strengthen the rules so that developer-led consultations for large or controversial proposals must use independent facilitators or accredited methods, not just the developers' PR agencies. Communities should have the right to challenge an inadequate consultation, and the council should be able to delay or refuse until the proper consultation has been done. Community engagement principles. Insert a duty for developers to submit a community impact statement with every major application. That CIS should show what the community said, what changed, what didn't, and why, plus a schedule of all promises made. Communities must be able to comment on whether that CS is accurate. Planning conditions and obligations. Where consultation promises are not delivered, the SCI should commit the council to enforce delivery through planning conditions or Section 106 obligation. In serious cases, breaches should be publicly reported so residents can see where developers fall short. Housing and affordability is part of the Council's commitment to building far more genuinely affordable housing. The SCI should require an affordability test at the pre-application stage. Developers should have to demonstrate how their schemes will meet local housing need, not just market demand, and communities should be able to scrutinise those figures from the outset. Chair, this isn't red tape, it's fairness. Consultation without accountability is just spin. These amendments would give communities real status as co-consultants, stop developer promises evaporating, and ensure housing that is truly affordable. I urge colleagues, let's give this SCI teeth so residents aren't just listened to, but respected and protected. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lynn. So I'd now like to invite Simon Richardson to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll take a few introductory remarks if I may, and then I will pass over to Simon. Actually, I'll go to Alex first, who will make a few comments from a development management point of view, and then I'll pass over to Simon for a few comments on the planning policy point of view. But again, picking up on the theme of earlier items this evening, consultation is really, really important, and it is really important that we give our communities the opportunity to give us the feedback and for us to listen to that feedback very carefully and see that it influences the way in which we make our decisions and we do things. The statement of community involvement is very much along those lines. It's a crucial document to ensure that there's a clarity on how we will consult with our communities around individual planning applications as well as our larger development plans like the local plan that we were talking about earlier. The first Northamptonshire SCI was adopted by full council back in July 2022. And this report explains how we are proposing to consult going forwards. There are some changes in it compared to the current version, and I'll hand over to Alex to explain some of those changes, and then Simon after that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm primarily going to focus on those changes in the document which relate to the development management and enforcement function of the council. So one thing I'd just highlight as background is the SCI is referenced, or the updating of the SCI is updated in our planning improvement plan, which is overseen by the council's planning improvement board. The updates we're looking to make in this document is some of the sort of building blocks we think we need to be able to push forward of other changes we want to make in terms of making it clearer for people to understand how they can engage with the planning process. A key change that's in the document from the last iteration is a change to the number of days that we would by standard go out to consultation for any planning consultation. So we're moving from 24 days to 21 days. One of the reasons that we're doing that is that there was an example of an application in Corby where there were some issues about the consultation that was undertaken, and as a council we undertook an audit into that situation, and the audit report came back and highlighted that the 24 days that we currently operate to is non-standard. It doesn't accord with the government guidance, and it doesn't accord with what many other councils do. So the suggestion that came out of that audit process is that we harmonise our process with others, harmonise our process with the Development Management Procedure Order, which is the national document that oversees what we have to do, and therefore less likely that we're going to have mistakes in the future because people understand that we're working to a consistent approach. Another change that we're looking to make, or to give ourselves the opportunity to make in the document, is to give absolute clarity as to when comments should come in on an application. So what it says in section 3.27 on page 110 of your agenda pack is that we're looking to have the ability to turn off the ability for people to make comments via the website at the end of the consultation process. What we want to do is we want to have clear understanding of who's made comments, when have the comments come in, and then we can then look to work through those and make sure they're accounted for and go through the planning application process properly. If we have a drip feeding of comments that come in later, they can sometimes get missed depending on when deadlines are for something to go to planning committee, and we want to make sure that people have got a degree of certainty. Although what we do also put in the document is to say that we will obviously show a degree of discretion. What we don't want to do is to silence people or take away their ability to engage with the process, but we want there to be a bit of clarity as to what the consultation period is. And then the last point to flag is in relation to some additional information that we've put into this iteration of the SCI over what we used to have. So one of the things we're trying to do is to make it as transparent as possible for local residents as to what they should expect from us. So we've taken some images that we have, some pictorial guides that we have, an internal guidance to support officers so they know where to put up site notices, which neighbours to consult on applications, and we've replicated them in this document in pages 108 and 109 of your agenda packs. And the whole purpose of that is so that residents know what they should expect, and therefore they can hold us to account. If they didn't receive a letter on a planning application, then it should be clear to them whether they should have got that letter or not, and so there's more clarity for them as to what to expect from us.
Thank you. So you're greedy there. You've got two switched on. So thank you. I'll pick up on the planning policy issues. So there are fewer changes to that element of the statement of community involvement, largely updates. So changes that have occurred in the last 3 years or so, or there's some changes to the consultees that are identified. The areas that are covered, though, is the council is at an early stage in the preparation of its local plan, and the statement of community involvement is one element of the tests that are considered by the planning inspector at examination. So have we conformed to our statement of community involvement? So we're wanting to set things out and tidy things up so that at that time, if that goes on, we're clean and clear to the inspector. As it states within the report, there are planned planning reforms due, but it's still much safer for us to go about setting out what we do. When new guidance comes about, we can then review that guidance and see how we want to go about interpreting that and making any further updates to any consultation document, guidance, note or strategy.
Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate it. We'll open it up to the floor with any comments or questions. Councillor Davis.
Just a point that Lynn raised with regards to some of these builders that build 10, 100,000, whatever quantity of housing, and then they said, oh, plant trees and playgrounds and such like, and these always are the last things or don't happen. What reassurances can we give constituents that if there's a development in their area, that they will deliver what they said they're going to deliver? An example would be the A14. They built that, I know it's not ours, planted 1,000 trees and then plastic little tubes. They've never grown, and no one ever got them back to say replant them. So where we've had trees on new estates, some of these trees have never grown, and no one's ever come back and said plant a new one. So how do we keep these builders accountable?
So the first challenge we have is the SCI is not a document where you can use as a stick in that way. So the SCI is designed to set out how we're going to consult with people. We do say in the SCI, we promote with developers that we want them to undertake developer-led consultation, and what it says in the SCI is we want them to submit a statement of local engagement to explain what they've done when it comes forward with the application. If we wanted to make the refer to my notes, the community impact statement and other things referred to by the public speaker as mandatory requirement, that would need to come through different forms of policy, either a policy on our emerging local plan or through what's called a local validation list, which is something which has to go through public consultation and be tested before it can be introduced. So we can take those offline and look at those, but it wouldn't be secured through this document, it would be secured by separate documents. There is a big challenge for us that there is a perception that somebody might promise the earth at the beginning of the process and then that doesn't come through at the end. However, the difficulty we have is that all we can ever do is make sure people do what they're meant to do at the point that the planning decision is made. So as we go through the planning application process, we do a full range of consultation, and the infrastructure needs and other requirements of a development going forward may only become fully known to us as we go through the application process. The developer might, in all sincerity, want to deliver the full suite of affordable housing and infrastructure requirements as they see it at the time before the application comes to us. But if, when we're considering the application, it's required that a new school needs to be put in place, or something else needs to be in place, we then might need to go for a balancing act and a viability assessment through the planning application process to make sure we're securing the best outcome to support and mitigate that development. And so it's not to say that the developer's done anything wrong by putting forward what they suggest might be their way they can mitigate the development at the beginning, but we have to go through a full testing of that process. And all we will ever seek to do is to make sure that those promises which are made at the point the application is determined and decided, those are the ones that we seek to enforce by using planning conditions and Section 106 obligations, as was referred to by the public speaker.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the introduction of this particular draft statement, I suppose it is, and also to Lynn for her comments as well. And just picking up on this last point that Councillor Davis mentioned, and Lynn as well, in relation to where promises are not delivered, is there any opportunity for greater enforceability and that breaches could be published? And I think you've mentioned, and I was going to ask, is this statement of community involvement the tool or the vehicle by which that could happen? And I think you've mentioned that it isn't, but there are other tools or policies that could be looked at as to whether we can somehow seek to ensure greater enforceability. And I think you mentioned the local plan in that regard is one. If that is the case, and if we're all on side that there does need to be greater enforceability in relation to promises that are made, is it possible for a recommendation from this committee to go to, for example, the local plan advisory group to consider that in terms of their input into the development of the local plan? Because if we're all on side on this, then we don't want to let it drop. We want to somehow provide our recommendation across to the relevant forum that's considering it in relation to the local plan. So I'm just wondering if that's something we can consider as a recommendation. Just staying on the same theme in relation to where developers and applicants submit a statement of local engagement showing how they've engaged the community and how the scheme has changed as a consequence, does that also include an encouragement from your part to the developers to publish a summary of the responses from local residents? Because if that summary isn't included, then how do we know whether any plans should be changed in response to what residents have said? Surely we should see a summary of the responses in relation to where they've engaged to know whether they should be changing their plan or not. And I'm just wondering if that's something that you could encourage of developers as well in relation to submitting a statement of local engagement.
So I'll deal with the first one. I'm tempted to do the second one, but I'll leave that to Alex to deal with. He can rather than talking over him, as it were. The first one. So within the planning improvement plan, which Alex mentioned earlier, which is overseen by the Planning Improvement Board, there is a strand of work within the planning improvement plan around enforcement. And some months ago now, as part of the board, we had a detailed workshop around enforcement and how we thought as an authority we could improve and enhance our enforcement approach when it comes to planning. So there is still work to be done there, which ties into a number of actions, that some of which are in train, some of others still need to happen. So I think we as officers would agree there's more we can do, and there are more tools that we can use, both formal statutory tools as well as simply doing things differently to do them more effectively and more efficiently. And certainly the members on the Planning Improvement Board would support that as well, I'm quite sure. And the Planning Improvement Plan has that action already in it. So we will be doing more work on enforcement through that mechanism. I'll hand over to Alex for the second one. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd slightly urge caution in relation to how we process the results that come forward from developer-led consultation. So what we're, from a headline perspective, what we're trying to promote is that good practice is followed by developers, that they engage with the local community, they listen to the local community, and they seek to take on board what the local community is saying. However, what we're held accountable for as a local planning authority is what we do through the formal consultation process, which comes through the planning application process. And what we don't want to do is to undermine the legitimacy of our formal consultation process in regard to a separate consultation process which was not undertaken by us, was not overseen by us, and we don't have control over. That said, I think in terms of the suggestion of having summaries of what people have said and how they've been looked at, if we look at paragraph 3.32 of the SCI on Agenda Pack, page 111, we talk about having a statement of local engagement, but we haven't gone into a lot of detail about what that is and what that looks like. So perhaps that's something we can take away and look to whether we bolster that particular paragraph in the SCI to put some more detail in there to pick up on some of the points being made, so that that statement of local engagement actually gives some detail for people so they can see what happened through that developer-led consultation process, but it doesn't undermine the seriousness and the weight that we need to give to our consultation process through the application stage.
I agree. I think the only thing, as Councillor Baker said as well, we should have something in there. If they come with a planning application to build a Stanton Cross, and then they're saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z if you help us get this through or over the line, then when they get it over the line and it's all done, and then there are no trees, there are no parks or facilities for children, then we should be able to hold them to account, because I wouldn't be approving another application from them because you just think they're not going to stand up to their word.
So through you, Chair. So it is a really important point you're making, and of course all communities want to have the infrastructure that should be there to support a development or mitigate the negative impacts it has on their communities. Absolutely, they should. Pre-engagement or pre-application consultation is a really valuable way for a potential applicant, because at that point they're not an applicant, they're a developer, they're a potential applicant, to get feedback from their communities. And we would encourage that, because it means they can shape their development based on that early engagement with the communities, whether it's around trees or infrastructure or anything else. So that's really important. Statutorily, the more important bit is what they put in their application, which could be completely different to what they tell you at a workshop or a community event or on the doorstep or anywhere else. What you need to judge them by, if you like, is what they put in their application, and that's what the planning committee or the officer who's delegated to make that decision needs to judge them by. That is the basis by which we judge their application, not what they've said in any other forum prior to that. And then the point you're saying there, Councillor Davies, around their commitments are laid out in the permission that they are given, which is conditioned and potentially has a Section 106 agreement alongside it as well. That is the stick in which we have to hold them to account. Again, it's not what they said in a village hall or a parish hall or anywhere else in a consultation process. It's in that planning permission that they've received. That's the yardstick in which we need to hold them to account.
Yes, Councillor Baker, I'll come back to you.
Absolutely agree with everything you've said, but in relation to pre-agreement or pre-consultation, or whatever the terminology is, engagement with local residents, the importance of publishing a summary of responses in relation to the statement of local engagement is A, for the purposes of transparency, but B, for the purposes of ensuring the level of response all the way through the consultation process. So if you've seen right from the start that in relation to a developer-led consultation, there has been near unanimous opposition to those proposals, and that follows all the way through the process in relation to your own statutory consultation, then you're seeing the level of opposition right from the start, rather than just from when you have your engagement from a statutory perspective. That's where I think it's really important, and that's where there needs to be transparency and accountability. That's why I've mentioned it. Just going back to the point about enforceability, in relation to the powers that you have in respect of enforcement at the moment, Is it a question of needing to look at it again in relation to the board that you've just mentioned because you don't have the necessary statutory powers, or you're just not interpreting them to the extent that perhaps residents would like you to do so, or is it a bit of both?
Through you, Chair, it's not a case, and I'll leave Alex to come in as he wants to. It's not a case we don't have the statutory powers. Statutory powers are there and they exist. Not any enforcement body, but most enforcement bodies and certainly local authorities have a vast array of statutory powers. They don't use them all for a variety of different reasons. But there is a vast array of statutory powers we can use when it comes to planning enforcement. We are certainly using some of them, but like any organisation, there should always be a self-reflection around continuous improvement, and that's exactly what the Planning Improvement Board is around. So it's whether or not we can do things differently to get better effect based on feedback from our communities. But it's also, and these are many of the conversations with the Planning Improvement Board, is any organisation, including ours, has got constraints around the resources that it has. So there's a decision there as to how to apply those resources to get the effect that you want. And there are choices to be made there because you can't do everything. So it's those sorts of conversations where we want to, how we want to use our resources effectively and where we want to target them.
Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you. Graham, just to go back to what you said about developers making promises to residents in certain situations. I think we've all as councillors encountered situations, or as residents, where we've spoken to developers, we've seen something that they've said online on the website or things like that, which turns out to absolutely not be true, because as we know, the planning application has to go based on what they've put forward in planning. What can we do as councillors and as a council to make sure residents understand how the planning process works? And in addition to that, what can we do to almost prevent developers from making promises that they shouldn't really be making?
Thank you. It's a really good question. I think the second question is far harder than the first, because I'm not sure we can ever control the situation as much as that question suggests. But certainly the first question is, again, similar to our previous conversation on the previous item. Local members are really, really valuable in engaging with their residents and their communities in the way that you're suggesting, and helping them engage with what is often a difficult process for them to understand and engage with. So anything you can do would be really helpful. We obviously try and support, or we do support members with the planning training that we have. So please engage with the planning training, because the more you understand the process, then that will help your residents. So if you haven't had the opportunity to attend those sessions, and they're ongoing, there's one every month on different topics, please do that. And obviously the YouTube videos are there for you to catch up in your own time if you aren't able to attend the actual sessions. So please engage with those. And then the main thing around for your communities and residents is to engage with the planning process at all stages along the way. So you'll often find that a resident or community will engage with the planning process when an application has been submitted, or perhaps in the pre-application consultation that the developer may or may not carry out. But generally when the application has been submitted, actually, as the SCI points out and as Simon points out, get communities engaged earlier than that, at the policy setting stage. So similar to the local transport plan conversation and the importance of getting consultation at the LTP development stage, consultation at the local plan development stage is absolutely crucial. So get your communities energised at that point, which is coming up very soon, to engage with the process and influence policy and site allocations right at the beginning, as well as later on when the applications come through. So some advice there, which I hope is helpful.
Thanks, Graham. Just on the training that we get as members, is there anything available for the public so that they can view via NNC so that they can understand how the process works?
That's a great question. We make the videos of the training available to town and parish councillors, so not the public per se, but other elected representatives in other democratic bodies. But I think it's a great question, and something that we can certainly reflect on through the Planning Improvement Board, in actual fact, to see what more we could do. We do try and I mean, it is a complicated beast, planning, but we do try and put as much sort of explanation on our standard web pages so that people can sort of understand what process we're at, for instance, like the local plan, what stage we're at and what the importance of that stage is and how they can engage with it. But I think it's a great question to think about how we might be able to do more of that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fedorovich.
Thank you very much. Yeah, to be fair, I think just off the back of that comment, really, I don't know why, or if we could consider some of those trainings, if they are recorded digitally, I think that would be great for the public to access those. Brilliant, thank you. So just very quickly, so on page 103 of the pack, it says a line. I'll just read it out because I think I'll just it says, other than this, and this is about emailing members of the public and groups. Unless you're included in the consultation database, you will not be notified or consulted directly and will need to refer to the council's website and local press or social media for other organisations that may promote this, such as parish councils, for information about planned consultations. I think this comes back very much to the conversation we've already been having about, I personally think that that's a very kind of dismissive way of phrasing things. I appreciate it comes down to sort of council resource and managing. It's always about managing emails. It's a hard job. But I don't think we have to take that burden on ourselves necessarily. But I don't think that's an excuse for us to wash our hands, essentially. We need to be proactive. It's hard. It is hard reaching people. That's the nature of our job a little bit. But I would like to see as asking town and parish councils for, we've talked about these full lists of community groups that they've got, getting them to email us and getting on our list. Like, how do we keep that going as a continual conversation? Also, I've mentioned previously about online briefings. Very much think this is relevant here. Online briefing for all parish, town and town councils. And also, as part of that, ask them how consultations could be improved, how we could reach more people, involve them in that in like a co-production process. I'd really, really like to see that because I know that people have really good comments that they can add. We've got a table also, and I'm less to find which page it is, 107. But it's essentially where we talk about category C and category E. And in this table, we talk about here how our publicity requirements, and I appreciate that there's probably legal aspects here of what is legally required, and then I think there's also a case of what is morally required. Planning is really important to local people, and category C is a proposal for a major development, we've put here that we can either put it up a site notice or a neighbour consultation. Personally, I don't think that should be an either or. I think that should be both. I would like to know what the resource implication of that would be. But if someone's there putting up a site notice, putting in a letter, either side shouldn't be drastic. I appreciate it's paper, but I would like to know what the implications of that would be. And especially a category C, which is a major development, there is almost certainly going to be quite drastic changes to that area. And just going to the adjoining owner or occupier seems quite minimal. I've had various sort of complaints over the years of people 2 doors down or something like that from something quite major that they've essentially not been informed, and it's a balance of our resources, I think, and just doing the right thing and making sure that the people are informed, just kind of also to cover our backs as well a little bit with it. I think this also comes down to category E, because we've got here, again, it's a site notice or a neighbour consultation. We don't know necessarily, we've got all other applications in here. This sort of encompasses quite a lot there. And I think it's hard to know really what that could entail, but I think it really shouldn't be either or there. We should just be using opportunity as much as we can. And I wanted to give a particular example as well, because on page 108, you did mention that you've got the sort of examples of how we decide who to inform in terms of the adjacent properties. The example given on page 108 is actually quite clear cut. When you see behind the property, it's one property, and it's quite clear that property should be informed. In real life, that's not what I've seen. One example I wanted to give was there's a row of terrace suites or terrace houses, and they obviously face sort of back onto each other. I can imagine that the officer didn't know which house was to the back of that property. they never got informed, and something is now very intrusive, literally looking over their property. They were never informed at the time, and I think it's a case of our risk management of if we can't be certain which house is exactly the one behind it, how do we manage that? My suggestion possibly might be to give the letters to a few houses just to be sort of prepared. But it's how can we manage that risk effectively? I'll sort of pause there. I had a couple of other points, but people might want to respond. Thank you.
Are you all right to take this? Thank you.
So the table that you referenced, where it says either or, is a direct lift from the statutory guidance. And one of the challenges we have in planning is a major application is 10 or more houses and 1,000 or more square metres of commercial floor space. So not all major applications are the same. We haven't gone to put in that we would automatically do letters and a site notice for every application to give us a degree of flexibility. And we've identified that discretion that we want to use. I think maybe what we need to perhaps consider is explaining to the public in this document how we'd apply that discretion. So what criteria we're using to try and work out when we're going to do the highest level of public consultation. And I would suggest that's going to be related to the scale and impact. So we want to make sure that things which are going to have the biggest scale and impact have the most amount of consultation that goes along with them. One of the things that we're also trying to do is be as transparent as possible with how we consult with people. So we referred to site notices there. We have fairly recently adopted internal guidance that officers have to follow when erecting a site notice. It always surprises me how many times people will tell us we didn't put up a site notice, and we did. So what we now try and do is to make sure that we've got 2 photographs of that site notice, one close, one in context, and a map showing where it's erected or where they were erected if it's multiple site notices, and they should be published. So they're held on our system and they should be published on our public website so that people can see, and we've got that transparency of what we've done. So we are seeking to make sure that we avoid those situations as you describe. And it's one of the things that officers are required to do when they undertake their site visit, is to do that assessment of, here's the map of where we've done the neighbour consultation or where we put the site notice. Is that realistic? Have we got the right people? Have we, a common situation you might get in an urban environment is there's been what used to be one house converted into flats or multi-residence. Have we written to all those people in there? Are our council records up to date? Has that been triggered to make sure we've sent the right letters? So it is something that officers check when they go on site to make sure that we're trying to target the right people and that people are informed of applications. The one challenge I would say is that a site notice and a letter are not perhaps the best way of telling people. So one other thing I would just refer to, which again is in our planning improvement plan, is the new database system that we're now using across the whole of the council. So we've recently gone through a project to bring all the different council teams in terms of planning onto one database, one software provider, and that has a public access system available for our website where people can register by search terms and by on a map and search areas to be automatically informed when something happens in their area. So that's another mechanism that people should be able to self-serve and then get triggered alerts when something happens in either where they live or another area they might be interested in, and it's a bit more up to date in terms of how people actually want to find out about things rather than relying on what are not always the best tools, which is the site notice and the neighbour letter.
Chair, thank you. If I could just come back. Thank you very much for those comments. It was really helpful. I think the triggered alerts would be brilliant, and I would highly encourage, if that system comes into play, I'd love to, champion that. One really simple thing as well with site notices, I actually just realised I should have mentioned this already, but we used to put out site notices on brightly coloured paper, and I don't know if that's something that officers are probably aware of, but that isn't something that happens anymore. I don't know why that is the case, or if we could utilise that a bit. But yes, that was something that was noted by a few members of the public that doesn't happen anymore, and obviously that it does impact people spotting them. And also in terms of one site notice, it's good that we're clocking, like proving that we have put the site notices there, but I suppose more is always better than too little. So it would be nice to see probably a couple more going up, but like you say, if we can do it via another means, for some automatic emails, that's even better. My only sort of other things were really just to confirm, like Councillor Baker's proposal to send the recommendation to the local area plan working group, but obviously that's actually already incorporated, which is really good. Still couldn't hurt to put the additional weight in, but I think that is something that's it does consistently come up, and I think we're all in agreement that we're not really confident that the follow-up is always there, and the breaches could be publicised a bit more. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Anyone else got any comments before I come in with a couple? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. And just one final comment or question for me, and I'm sure that the officers can answer it very quickly. It's just following up on Councillor Gibbs' point about consultations with the public, and I'm just intrigued in relation to 3.25 of the papers in respect of, obviously you will only take into account when reaching a decision representations relating to material planning considerations, but I can imagine that in relation to almost every single consultation you receive a lot of comments on matters that are not material planning matters. And I'm sure I've done it in the past in relation to responding to consultations in respect of planning. We probably all have. I'm just wondering in relation to your consultations whether you do provide examples of what would be considered as material planning considerations, and perhaps more specifically what wouldn't be considered. Because I'm just wondering if you don't do that, but if you did do it, you'd be avoiding a lot of wastage in relation to having to consider or at least receive comments that are just not material planning considerations.
So you can look at this from another perspective. So we do provide guidance. So there's guidance on the website, and we lots of councils provide guidance on what a material planning consideration is and isn't. Oftentimes, what I do if I'm advising local people who are concerned about something is I say, don't self-censure yourself. Don't limit what you're saying to the council. You tell us what your concerns are, and it's our job to work out whether that's a planning issue or not. What I would be nervous about is if we're very specific and very heavy-handed with guidance that we give people, that people almost don't tell us things that concern them because they're worried that it might not be seen as a material consideration. And so my guidance has always been to people, if you throw the kitchen sink at it, we will go through that and we'll make sure that we pick out those things which are material planning considerations. Now, that is a resource impact for the council. It would be brilliant if people only made very, very targeted, very short comments on planning applications on material issues. But the challenge we've got is if they don't put forward things and then come back afterwards and have concerns or complain to the council we didn't take something into consideration appropriately, that's probably a bigger risk. So it's about finding that right balance. We put out into the public domain as much guidance as possible, but we don't want to unduly influence people so that they don't put forward the comments that they want to make at that stage so they can feel that their voice is being heard and we know what the concerns are.
Well, you're the officers, not me, so you will know what is best in that regard and how many comments you get that are not material planning considerations. I can imagine it's really difficult because obviously every planning application and development is different and unique, and that there isn't a one-size-fits-all in that regard. But I'm sure if you wanted to give some examples and not be heavy-handed in relation to what would not be considered as material planning considerations, I'm sure that could be done without putting off residents. It's just really a question as to how much time it takes at your end to sift through all the comments and weed out everything that isn't a material planning consideration. If you consider that in relation to every single consultation you do, it's not a big deal in relation to weeding those out, then it's not a big deal. But if you did feel as though it could have some benefit, I'm sure you could come up with a set of words that wouldn't be too heavy-handed.
Just very quickly, Chair, there is some wording on the website, as Alex says already, so by all means review that, and if you've got some comments, let us know them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, just for myself, following up with what you were saying earlier, Alex, when the planning notices go out and then you update the website publicly, is there feasibility for you to actually email a copy of that notification to the local councillors? I know it's going to be a lot, but if you're already publishing it on the website, because, for example, whenever we get trees chopped down in our area, that department sends an email saying, just let you know, trees being removed in this area so that we've got opportunity to respond. If that was something that was feasible for planning for each ward, because we're going to know our residents and be able to take it to our social media posts and maybe get some better numbers from public consultation, because we're going to know where those areas are and be able to focus that notice to a wider area that we think is of importance. Is that something that's feasible?
So it comes back to a previous point I was making actually about having constrained resources. So is it feasible? Yes, it's feasible. But will it prevent officers from doing something else? Yes, it will. So it's about balancing what is the best use of their time for the benefit of in the end of the day. What I would prefer to go in the direction of, and it very much ties in with what Alex has said before, is to find automated ways in which you can get information about what's going on in your local community. So at the moment, it's quite a laborious effort to distribute the information around planning applications in your areas and wards. It uses officer time, which could be, frankly, better spent for better benefit for our communities and our residents. So we want to automate that. Now, you can already go on the planning on our planning website on our system, and with a number of clicks, you can see what applications have been submitted for your area, validated and submitted in your area. So it's already there. You can do it 24 hours a day. You can see what applications come through the ward. I appreciate that still requires a member to sort of proactively think, right, I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes sitting down, clicking here, and see the list. It's all there. You can do it. But what we'd really like to do is move to what Alex has talked about earlier, where we're pushing that information out to people who have registered for it. And I've introduced it to other local authorities to great effect and been very popular, where you get an email alert once a week to say these are the applications in your area within a defined area that you have already determined. That's where I want to get to, because it's automated, it gets the information to your inbox very quickly, and it doesn't tie up officer resource, which could be used to better effect for the benefit of our residents.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. If we can automate it, even better. But getting that information to us, with obviously workloads that we've got as well, obviously, is going to be massively helpful for me, that we can all preempt that and go out to residents. But automation, absolutely, I couldn't agree with that anymore. There, absolutely. Any other comments from anyone or questions or anything? No. So I just want to come back quickly to what you're saying earlier then, Councillor Baker, to make sure I'm getting this right. So you've proposed that we, as the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee, recommend that officers explore the opportunities and continue to engage with the Planning Advisory Board or Planning Improvement Board with regard to enhancing the enforcement of planning conditions with the necessary developers. First of all, have I got that right? Is that what you're proposing?
It is. I think then coupled with that, whether there is any scope for breaches to be published, and I think that was something that Lynn mentioned, and certainly I'd picked up on that as well. It's just whether, notwithstanding the fact that those considerations are already going on through the Planning Improvement Board, whether they would be given greater traction if there was such a recommendation from this forum.
So based on that, I think that's a proposal come for yourself. Do we have someone that seconds that at all? Yeah, so we've got Councillor Davis to second that. Yeah, so if we open that up to a vote then and see if we're all happy with that. So if we can show of hands for everyone that's in favour of that proposal. Yeah, that's unanimous. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that vote being concluded, that takes us straight to the end. We've finished that one, so I appreciate your time, officers. Thank you very much for that, and thank you, Lynn, for your for your time tonight dedicating to this. That brings us to agenda item 9, closing the meeting. So there being no further business, I close this meeting at 2100.